Hi, and welcome back to the Culture Chronicles. My name's Kate Ball. I am your resident bullshit exorcist and host. And today we're going to be talking about something very near and dear to my heart, which is imposter syndrome and how women show up at work. Because let's face it, imposter syndrome, self-doubt, that persistent voice whispering that you're not good enough. We've been told it's a personal flaw and something that needs to be overcome with a mantra and a smile. But what if it's not about internal insecurity at all? What if it's a confidence conspiracy engineered by environments that gaslight, undervalue, and underestimate brilliant women? So, today in this episode, I'm sitting down with HR powerhouse Hannah Rogers to dismantle the myth of imposter syndrome and expose the real culprits: broken systems, biased feedback loops, and the impossible standards women are held to. So it's raw, it's real, and it's the conversation that every woman and leader needs to hear. So, hi, Anna. Hannah, even. Can't say my H's today. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have a conversation about this topic.
Great. And before we dive in, perhaps you could just do a brief intro to yourself so people know why you know what you're talking about as well.
I've spent most of my career working in HR for some really huge companies. Spent some time at Amazon. Current company I'm with is an energy company. And I've spent a lot of my time in quite male dominated environments where I've definitely felt imposter syndrome really creep into my kind of day to day work. And I've certainly noticed that in the teams that I manage as well. Managed quite large teams across the EU, and it seems to be a thing that happens all over. Started out in operations, so worked in kind of retail operations post university, and then probably the second half of my career have worked predominantly in HR environments. So that's kind of a little bit about me.
And so let's start at the root of the problem. What actually is imposter syndrome, in your opinion? Is it self doubt, self awareness, or something more sinister?
So for me, I was really thinking about this, and it's not so much about self doubt, although self doubt does really creep in to me, especially when I overthink certain situations. For me, it's a lot more about self awareness. I'm quite aware of myself in a meeting. Often it would be, will I contribute as much as everyone else around the table? Certainly when I've come into new roles, will I be knowledgeable enough to really contribute to the discussion? How long will it be until I'm knowledgeable enough to contribute to that discussion? So often there's this kind of internal message going around in my head that sometimes I look around the table and think, do other people feel like me? Or is it just, sometimes it feels like it's just a me thing. And that's definitely where I've seen it. I'm quite aware of being, certainly in HR, the knowledgeable one, the one that's going to tell people what they can and can't do, how to follow certain legislations, etc. So I'm very conscious that my advice, my guidance, my decisions on certain things are taken really seriously. So that sometimes means that I question those decisions, and that's where that kind of more the self-awareness kind of comes in. I've tended to work in quite male orientated organizations and teams. So again, I'm often one of maybe one or two people around a very male dominated table, which I have no issue with. I really enjoy working with both men and women. But again, that kind of makes me a bit more aware of my presence in that situation.
Absolutely. And I know for me, throughout my career, but particularly recently, I've been doing a lot of work that's very visible. And so for me, the imposter syndrome shows up a lot in terms of, well, why should anybody care what I have to say or what I think? And why should I put myself on
Absolutely.
camera versus other people that I personally feel are more qualified or more credible or eloquent? I can't even get my H's out today, for God's sakes. It shows up for me in that respect where it's like the internal voice, the critique that you
Totally.
can't quite silence.
Totally. And I often feel that everybody knows a bit more than I do, you know? And I don't know where that comes from, but I often think that person sounds so put together, so organized in their approach. Do I sound like that, or do I sound quite chaotic? Even in preparation for this, I'm kind of, how do I keep myself on track? And I often think about things like that, which I'm not sure other people necessarily always do in the same way.
No, I can tell you for sure I do as well. But let's try and break it down. Like, what do you think it is that fuels this internal critic that we all seem to have? Like, are there external forces that benefit from keeping us unsure of ourselves?
Potentially. I think for me, I think I'm seen often as the person that kind of has it all. And by that, I don't mean that in any form of arrogance or anything like that. I've just always been a bit of a career girly. I've always loved my job. And that's not something that every person feels throughout their career, but I really have. But I also then balance the my home life. So I have two children. I used to feel a huge amount of imposter syndrome around being a mum, actually, more than at work. I kind of felt like work was where I was really great. And actually, because I was a full-time working mum, I didn't necessarily fit in with my counterparts that had children of my kind of kids' age. So I've kind of felt imposter syndrome in different ways all through my life, really. But I do think there is a kind of a slight bias in some cases that you kind of have to prove yourself that little bit more. You have to show up a little bit more. And I've definitely found that kind of internal critic. I'll often play down my out of work situation to succeed at work, which is something I don't actually do as much as I did, but I certainly in my early career would kind of focus much more on work externally. Internally, I was always a mum, and that was where my priority was. But externally, I would portray this image that I could do it all, whatever hours needed to be done, whatever role, tasks, etc., needed to be done. And that was something that I spent a lot of time kind of managing that like inner voice of, you know, you need to show up as everything. Great mum, great work, etc.
And there's a lot at play from external society, from the way women are portrayed in the media and films and stuff like that. But I also can't help but relate it back to my own experience. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately is the criticism, constructive or not, that I've received throughout my career, and particularly moving from the UK to the US, how you show up at work and how you're viewed by your peers and those around you. There's slight nuances and changes, but the same kind of constant theme showed up a lot for me throughout my career. I was always called out for being too outspoken, for being too
Mm.
opinionated, for being not arrogant, but overconfident was thrown back at me a lot.
Me too.
When it
And me
came
too.
to, like, the Amazon leadership principles, for example, I was always dinged on earned trust, and it wasn't because I wasn't trustworthy and I didn't build great relationships, but it was perceived that I was too much in those environments, and so I needed to tone it down or pare it back, and at the time you're receiving that feedback, particularly if you get it year after year after year from multiple parties, it inevitably chips away at your confidence.
Absolutely.
But now I'm able to step away. There's a huge part of me that's thinking, well, what did the company benefit from beating me down, from taking that confidence away, from questioning me? And was that fair? Would they have delivered the same kind of critique to a male counterpart or to somebody more senior than myself? Was I just showing up in a way that threatened people, even though that wasn't necessarily a wrong way to be? So that's what I'd like to chip away at and really get your thoughts on, like, how
Yeah.
subtle cues, like the language we use, like being accused of being intimidating or too ambitious or not collaborative enough because you're taking the credit for your own work rather than sharing it. Like that all chips away. So what role do you think feedback plays in fueling this inner critic or imposter syndrome?
Really huge, and it kind of made me reflect on a similar situation I found myself in, where I was described as part of an interview loop as being overconfident. And actually, I was confident. I was confident that I could do a great job in the role that I was applying for. It was an internal role, but it was really quite direct feedback about kind of me as a person, really. I'd come across as overconfident. I think the exact expression was very full of myself. But then it was like, but how do you want me to show up? Do you want me to show up as somebody, because this particular department for the role that I'd applied for faced quite a lot of challenges. There'd been ongoing historical issues within this team. So I needed to show up really as somebody that had the confidence and the capability, but more actually the confidence to take on this role. And I kind of, in my personal mind, I didn't take that as a criticism, but the person giving me the feedback definitely gave it to me as a growth area, if you like, rather than a superpower. It was definitely portrayed as just something to be aware of. And I kind of thought, I'm not sure if I was a guy, I would be given that feedback. They kind of wanted somebody that was going to be confident, going to be strong in their decision making ability, that was going to hire a great team, that were all going to be really capable, agile, resilient, gritty leaders. So actually the person at the head of that organization also needed to portray those characteristics. So but it did get me thinking that never before have I kind of received that feedback in a negative way. Normally confidence is seen as being a strength, but it was definitely seen as being kind of it kind of went from confidence to kind of full of myself, which felt a little bit unfair. But it definitely stopped me in my tracks, I have to say. It definitely made me kind of think, oh, okay, I didn't think I did. Maybe I need to think about that. And it made me quite wary of that leader who was actually the leader of the operations side of that organization. And I did definitely find myself being quite conscious of, am I coming across as being too cocky, too know-it-all? And that certainly hindered, I would say, my first couple of months in the role, because I was really self-aware of coming across as too confident.
It's funny because, as I said, I've been on a journey of thinking about this myself, and I've kind of gone the other way because at the time, I felt I needed to shrink myself. I felt like
Yeah.
I needed to kind of dull my shine a little bit so that I didn't rock the boat. And now, instead, I'm very much aspiring to be like the people that you see. They're all over my network. I follow divas basically, but now I'm very much, you know what? I am good at what I do, and I am not ashamed of that. I'm not going to hide that. And you know what? I'm unapologetically owning this shit.
Yeah.
It's really funny. I haven't quite knocked out the imposter syndrome yet, but it's definitely kind of altered the way that I listen to that inner voice. And
Big
it's
time.
almost like I dare myself internally now, like, why am I telling myself to hold back? That means I need to ramp it up another 10% because
No, true. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And I think it's just
so
like owning the person that you are and not being
mhm,
ashamed of how you are, because your back catalogue, your history talks for itself. I often used to feel I'd been quite lucky in my career. I'd kind of had these opportunities and sort of fallen into them. And actually, when I reflect, it wasn't that at all. I got to those roles because of my capability, but I definitely did. I used to think, maybe I was lucky. Maybe I was the only person that applied for a job. You know, maybe that, this person really, really, champions my career. So they kind of put a good word in for me. I'd create all of these narratives in my mind, that most of which
yeah.
were completely untrue.
And the reality is you worked your ass off and you deserve
Absolutely.
everything that you have and more.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So we've both been around HR for a very long time, although my side of HR isn't really the generalist piece. So I'm really interested in your opinion here. But do you think there is a difference or an implicit bias in the way that we give women feedback versus men?
I think so. I was thinking about this as well, and I was thinking about the amount of unsolicited advice I receive, um, particularly from men. So not even asking for feedback, but will often receive feedback on, you know, and it's all often, just to be aware of this, or just a bit of friendly advice or things like that. And I kind of think, actually, I don't really see men doing that with each other, or necessarily women doing that to men. And that's just my experience. But I definitely have noticed in the last few years receiving a lot of kind of like, I'd call it like unsolicited advice. Like, I think Women are definitely, me personally, and certainly within my team, we're a lot more comfortable giving each other feedback. We're kind of less concerned. We're more concerned. Like, we feel very conscientious about the work that we do. So we try and communicate with each other if there's areas for improvement or if there's things we can do better as a team. So I definitely feel the feedback culture is a lot more free and, yeah, just a lot more kind of natural, I guess, within my kind of female cohort of leaders. And often when you kind of try and give similar advice to our male counterparts, it sometimes doesn't go down in exactly the right way. But I think that's a lot to do with trust. I think that's a lot to do with how we position the feedback, that we normalize giving each other feedback, that it doesn't come from the blue or feel like a personal attack. So I think the more you build feedback into your day-to-day work, and certainly at Amazon, it was day to day, it was constant feedback all the time, and you just got used to that, whether it was kind of growth opportunities, strengths, weaknesses, whatever. You kind of got used to that way of working, and it definitely worked for me. um and made me a lot more confident giving feedback as well.
And one of the things that I think rarely gets picked up, we all seem to kind of jump to the negative when we talk about feedback. Like, we always think it's the constructive criticism. And very few leaders make it a practice to give that positive kind of affirmation and feedback
Well, we
as
don't
well.
Yeah, we don't celebrate the wins enough. So I don't know about you, but when I would get my end of year feedback at Amazon, it was kind of split into like your kind of strengths and then your growth areas. And I literally would immediately, I would not even skim read the top part. I would immediately go to the growth opportunities. And I remember quite a few of my leaders over the time have said, no, go back up to the top. Let's start at the top. It's there for a reason at the top. Let's just go through all of that first, because actually the good stuff way outweighs any of the growth opportunities. But I guess it was a kind of inner thing of just wanting to always do my best and always wanting to be the best version of myself at work. So yeah, my eyes always moved to what I could do better, rather than taking the time to celebrate the win, to own the wins, to talk about things I'd achieved. I always found that highly uncomfortable. I much preferred to focus on what my team had achieved or what other people around me had achieved, and really play down my achievements, because that felt more comfortable.
Yeah, I always say I could give you 20 things I need to work on straight off the top of my head, but ask me to do 5 things I do well, and it will take me half an hour at least. So I get that very much. So I'm very conscious of the fact that we're talking men and women. Of course, we're in a society
Yeah,
that's not so binary anymore, but it really just is the easiest way in a short conversation to
of course.
kind of define this. I'm wondering, do you think that men are similarly impacted by constructive criticism and maybe just not given the language or the permission to admit it? There's that whole kind of toxic masculinity still.
I think for sure, I didn't ever see a huge difference between the way that women would give and receive feedback versus men. I think we all internalize and externalize things in a different way, regardless of gender. So, but I definitely will. I think what we're better at is talking about things and normalizing it. So, I'm a huge mental health advocate. I always have been, and I see, certainly on LinkedIn, my feed is packed full of people normalizing that, which feels amazing. And I did a post a few months ago about imposter syndrome, and somebody reached out to me and said, "Oh God, that was quite vulnerable of you to do that." And I kind of had that instant thing of like, I don't know whether that was the aim, but it immediately was kind of, okay, do I need to delete that? But I didn't. So I think it's just your confidence in normalizing it, really, and how we create a psychologically safe environment for people to be able to say, I need some help in this piece of feedback I've received, or I want to give someone this feedback, but I don't want them to take it in a negative way. I just want to try and help them. So I see that across the board. I don't think that necessarily feels different for men or women. I just think it's how we communicate as different genders, and how we feel comfortable in that space. And I've definitely done as much coaching with male leaders as I have with female leaders on that.
Think that's a really great point, actually. You made me think back to some conversations with my partner where he's seen my LinkedIn post and gone, "Oh, I'm not sure you should have that out there publicly." And I've gone, "Well, if I don't, who will?" Like, I'm
Agreed.
creating the opportunity for others to relate, to say that they feel the same way or they've experienced the same things. And somebody has to start that conversation. Like,
Yeah,
if it's me, that's fine. If it's someone else, that's fine. But I'm not ashamed to put things out there, whereas he would rather internalize and just
agreed.
sit
And I
on it.
think it's like how I think if you come across authentically, because we all will go through good days, bad days, feeling like we're not worthy of our seat at the table versus feeling like we've completely smashed a meeting, completely owned our agenda, etc. And it's not always about posting that to social media, but it is about normalizing. I think someone commented and said, I just never would have seen you as somebody that struggled with imposter syndrome. And I'm not sure it's a struggle, but it's part of who I am. And I'm not embarrassed to admit that. It's just who I am. But equally, I think if you show a bit of normalness and a bit of humility, people can then relate to you a lot more. And I think they think, okay, well, she's created that safe space for me to be able to share how I feel about a particular topic, or, you know, share how I feel about my work. Is my work adding value? Do I feel like I'm really making a difference? Like we talk about that a lot in our team currently. Are we making a difference? Are we kind of winning of what we're trying to do? I think it by doing the stuff that you do, the stuff that I do, the stuff that I see loads of ex-colleagues, current colleagues doing, it's just keeping the agenda alive, and it's creating a safe space. Even if you just want to put a like on it rather than even comment, it's saying, actually, yeah, I feel validated by what you've written, and thank you for starting the conversation.
Yeah. So when we think to advice, because obviously you and I are both at a stage of our careers where we've kind of been around the block, we've learned a few things, but we've got a responsibility to those that are coming up, that are starting their careers and are looking to us for guidance. So, what kind of advice could you give to somebody who's early in their career, getting some breaks, making some success, but starting to feel that syndrome step in?
Yeah, I think if I wish for myself I'd spent longer charting my successes. I think I when I look back at my career, I often look at the things that maybe could have gone better, or the things that I wouldn't necessarily say went wrong, but the things that maybe at the time I saw as a failure. I would definitely encourage anybody to really listen, learn, see all your kind of mistakes or things that could have gone better as just learnings rather than errors, really. And that certainly would have helped me back then. And certainly I say to teams within our team, and certainly in teams that I've worked with and looked after before, is, mistakes are part of your journey. They're part of learning. And if we don't make them, we're just not normal. Everybody makes a mistake.
Let's
However,
learn.
it's how you learn from that, and it's how you kind of dust yourself off and get back up again and continue what you're doing, and don't let it affect you hugely. I often refer to myself as a bit of an etch a sketch, which is a bit of a like 80s, 90s toy, but effectively you just kind of shake it and everything disappears off the screen. And I feel like sometimes I wake up each day and that's how I tackle life, really, is just try not to take what's happened the day before that into my next day, because otherwise you just kind of are bogged down by those perceived failings, and you can really let it get into your head and things like that. So I really try and wipe the slate clean each morning, but keep learning from those things that haven't gone right, and think, okay, next time if I had my time again, I would deal with it in a slightly different way.
Yeah, that's some great points there. And one of the things I want to add from my perspective as well is I don't think I advocated enough for myself early on. I think, and it's a very traditional British thing anyway, I think, and I've only realized this since starting working in the US, but
Yeah, I bet.
you have to be your own biggest champion. Nobody's going to do it for you. And sometimes you might not feel ready to step into the next role just because you haven't necessarily demonstrated every single thing or ticked every single box. But at the same time, that's the ideal time. You need to step out of the comfort zone. And I think in my career, I spent too long waiting to be comfortable, waiting to be 100% confident, and
Yeah,
not pushing for opportunities that I think I could have actually stepped into far earlier than I ended up doing so. So that would be my other thing, is that internal voice telling you you're not ready yet. Actually try and ignore it as much as possible, because the people
absolutely.
around you will feed that back enough without you doing it for yourself.
Interesting. I remember a leader from the US actually saying to me, like, you don't need to know everything to be able to do this job. And it was quite early on in my career actually at Amazon, but he said to me, you don't need to know the intricacies of the role that the people you're line managing do. You just need to be a strong leader and understand the basics, really. I was really beating myself up about the role that these guys were doing, and it was a really pivotal role within a kind of fulfillment center. But he kind of just said, just go easy. They know their job. You're just there to kind of lead them in the right direction, set some really clear accountabilities for each of them. And that kind of really helped me. And it's kind of carried on through my whole career of like, I don't need to know the role of everybody in my team to be an effective leader. I just need to show strength in my own leadership style, be available to talk to, show humility, show respect, be a role model to those people rather than understand their role and micromanage them, because that is not the kind of leader I am. And that's kind of set me in quite good stead, actually.
And so, thinking to the wider audience that we'll probably have listening to and watching this, like, what advice do you have for managers, for leaders that are looking to support teams, and help not only lead by example, but help anticipate and overcome that imposter syndrome earlier to prevent it holding people back?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things. I think I've mentioned already about the psychological safety. So providing a safe space for everybody learns at a different level. I think often we want people to kind of come in and know the job from day one. Company cultures are really different, and actually understanding those cultures and how you can make a difference in those environments sometimes takes a while. I think creating that safe space to say, that's okay, but I'm here if you need any support with that, I think is a big one. I think diversity in the workplace, certainly for me, is huge. Like, it shouldn't just be a tick box exercise that we need more women. We need to have a team of people running our businesses that are representative of the general population. So that's a really important one for me. It's having the right people around the table, but it's also for me as a female leader being able to relate to those people and to see them as role models that are going to drive our business forward. But I think as well, it's like providing real support. By that, I kind of mean providing mentorship, kind of, I guess, nurturing female leaders. Like I said to you before, I've worked in quite male dominated environments. So I spend a lot of my time, certainly at Amazon, working in engineering. We really nurtured our female leaders within our engineering population because we wanted to attract more female leaders in, but we also wanted the female leaders that we already had to feel supported, to feel heard, to feel seen in their roles. So I think providing that feels authentic. It doesn't just, again, feel like a tick box exercise, but it really feels authentic and can act as a bit of a beacon for newer leaders coming in. How's my role going to change if I have children? How's my role going to change if I go part time? Really trying to kind of, I suppose, like, make those things more real, I think is so important. But doing it from an authentic space rather than, like I say, a more of a tick box exercise.
It makes sense. It really does. And at the same time, it exists, but it's not used as much as it should be, in my opinion. I do think there should be, much like we have when writing a job description, you have like a gender coding tool. I do think there should be something similar implemented when writing feedback for employees in terms of looking at the language you're using and then really intentionally questioning, why have you used that word? Why have you used overconfidence or arrogance or things like that? And really drilling down to better highlight those unconscious biases that
It's
do
about
tend to
biases,
creep.
isn't it? It's really those
Mhm.
unconscious biases. And again, that was something that I really took from my time at Amazon, was how easily they can happen, and how easily you can get into a conversation about when a woman might have another child, and you just sort of think you would just never ever have that conversation about a man. You would never refer to a man as a superman, but we refer to women as superwomen all the time. Well, and not all the time, but certainly in my experience. So, like it's removing those things that we think are somehow, I don't know,
Differentiators.
differentiate. Yeah, and it's kind of like, why do we do that? Like we don't, why would we do that? Is this woman going to have another baby? Do we know whether this person's going to have another baby? It's just like crazy. So that's a huge learning that I took from Amazon and other places that I've worked, actually, was around really checking myself around some of those unconscious biases and keeping the leadership team around me true to those things, because sometimes it's really easy to kind of, move into that space almost without thinking about it. So that's definitely something that is really important that we don't do.
Awesome. And just final question from me. Like we talked about Amazon a lot. It's inevitable because we've both come from there. So it's a relatable thing for us. But are you seeing improvements in this area? Do you feel optimistic about the future, or do you feel like we've kind of stagnated? There was work done and it's not really moved forward in the last 5 years or so.
I definitely feel there's a lot more work to do. I would love to say I really see active steps forward. I think companies certainly want to do better in this space. I think there's certainly like groups of people that really want to kind of make a positive change and want to create um a better environments for kind of our female employees. I think it comes from, it's a cultural thing. It comes from the objective that we set and the roadmap, I guess, we have for the businesses that we work for. And I think it needs to definitely feel much more authentic than, we need to have 20% of our engineers that are female. Well, actually, no, we need to have the best engineers. And we hope that there will be a good representative of female talent, but it's not about distinguishing in that harsh sense. It's just about how do we nurture our female talent where we know there are natural biases, there's differences in the way they juggle their time, not completely versus men, but in the main, you're kind of seen as like having it all, but what does that actually mean? You just got a lot of stress. So I think it's there's more we could do to make it more just part of what we do in our DNA, rather than it being a DEI strategy, or in a way that we need to kind of set really clear goals around it. I think it's just more like, how do we want to represent, you know, the workforce today in 2025? And that's what I'm interested in, much more than having set targets around, females in the workplace.
Okay, and unfortunately, I have to draw us to a close. But for anybody out there who's currently struggling with imposter syndrome themselves, are there any tools, kind of mindset shifts, or support networks you would recommend, or anything else that you would suggest?
So I'm part of the Women's Leadership Association, and that is a great group of women. We really hold each other to account for certain things. We encourage, there's a huge amount of encouragement as part of that movement, a huge amount of sharing, whether that be a funny quote or just particular situation. I'm part of the HR Ninjas community, which again, I learn a huge amount from there, actually. But I would also say I've really shifted my mindset around feeling like I've kind of fallen on my feet with a lot of roles. And actually, how have I got to where I am in my career? And I've got there because I've literally worked my socks off. I wasn't the most academic person. I didn't necessarily fly through my A levels and university, but I kind of more scraped. But what I have done is worked really hard, and I've worked hard on myself, worked hard um, in being good at what I do, and stopped telling myself I've just got lucky, and started telling myself I kind of deserve to be where I am. It's taken a while, I have to say, but it's definitely surround yourself with like-minded people, I would say, and there's plenty of communities as part of LinkedIn, like I say, HR ninjas, etc., that are there to kind of advocate for us in this space.
Yeah, that's great advice. To add as well, one of the things that I've started doing and is really helping me is taking a snapshot of where I was a year ago versus now, and really taking the time to recognize that even though I'm not yet where I want to be or aspire to be, in fact, nowhere near, the leaps and bounds that you've made, and it doesn't have to be a year, it can be a shorter time period, it can be a longer time period.
Absolutely.
It's really illuminating to look back on the journey and then recognize all of those developments, even if you didn't recognize them as a win at the time, what they've led on to, what they've enabled you to achieve. And really take the time to acknowledge that. I
I
think that's
agree.
something really important.
Totally agree.
Awesome. But all right, well, Hannah, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you. I've
Thanks
loved
for having
this conversation. Obviously, neither of us are fixed yet. We're still gonna be fighting this fight, I think, but it's really important to have the conversation and to make others aware that strong women out there all over the world are feeling exactly the same way. It's perfectly normal, but here's some of the things that we can do, and here's some of the kind of rationalizations you can deploy to try and get yourself out of it. Definitely a conversation I think is gonna need to continue.
for sure.
But really appreciate you joining us today
Thank you
and for
so much.
everyone that joined us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Have a great one, everyone. We'll see you soon. Bye.